Welcome to the Bywords Show. I'm your host, Hannah Hughes. Bywords is all about equipping women for purposeful living by starting conversations, celebrating stories, and inspiring faith. In a world that applauds the hustle, I'm here to help you break free from the lies and come back to what really matters. It's time to get real, get rooted in truth, and come alive in relationship with Jesus so you can show up to each day with intention and confidence no matter where you're at in your story. Here we believe that embracing our stories brings hope, healing, and purpose to the process, and sharing our stories helps others do the same. Whether you're looking for a midweek faith refresh, practical tools for pursuing your dreams, or just need some good old-fashioned girl talk, you're in the right place. Grab your latte and let's dive in. Hello, everybody. Today is the day. Welcome back to another episode of the Bywords Show. I'm so glad you're here. You guys, I'm so pumped. Today we have Juliana Page with us. We're going to be talking about all kinds of stuff. Overcoming self-sabotage, power of accountability. I'm just so excited to dive into this conversation. So, Juliana, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Absolutely. Well, I'm just so pumped to dive into this conversation. But as we get started, would you just kind of tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yes. Well, so I love, if you've never done a name meeting before, I just love telling people what my name means because I feel like if anything, that just captures who I am. So
Oh, I
Julian
love that.
means joyful servant or youthful messenger. So at the core of what I do, that's it, right? I'm showing up
Yeah.
as that in every aspect. And that is through coaching. I've been coaching since 2008, which is wild, right? Before that was even an industry that people thought was safe.
Yeah.
Yeah, back then they thought you were crazy or you're getting scammed or something, right? So now we've evolved, which is great. And people actually can see the value. So I've been coaching since then. I run a community called Courage Co, which is all about helping people live their most courageous and impactful story. So it's really a hub, if you will, where people can get training, they can get activated. We have prayer calls, we have virtual small groups, a mastermind. So much is in there. We have a coach certification program as well. So there's just levels to how people can develop. And then I have a podcast called God's Vibes where we just riff on all things God's Vibes, which is really fun.
I love that so much. That's so cool about the name thing too. I feel like I wish people talked about that more because I feel like there's so much in that, but that's so perfect for you, to a T. I love it.
It is really funny just how it will. Well, which is interesting now that people are going to have this as an assignment, they'll start Googling their name. The way the enemy works in your life is always opposite to your identity, which is
I
really
have actually heard that before. It's so crazy, you guys. I've heard this before. When I was in college, I went to Bible college, so everybody was talking about this kind of stuff all the time. And Hannah means grace and favor, and I am just I'm an Enneagram 3, so achiever to the max,
yes,
go-getter,
yes.
striving has always been my thing, and self-criticism, all that. So I'm like, "Yep, I could totally see that." So yes, you guys, in the first couple minutes of the show, you've got your homework assignment. Go figure
There
out
you
what
go.
your name is.
We're done here.
I love it. Oh my gosh. Okay, well, so let's get to the good stuff of what we're going to talk about today with the self-sabotage and figuring out this whole concept of accountability. Will you just tell us our story? How have you become so passionate about those things?
Yeah, I think from a very young age. So this is a crazy story, but I was 10 and I'm adopted in the natural, but I didn't know this at 10. So my adoptive mother put me on the phone with my birth mother and said, "Your mom wants to talk to you." And I was 10, right? Now, my adoptive mother was struggling with alcoholism. So there's so many things that were happening in that moment, but it was a wild moment because you get on the phone and you're like, this woman thinks that I know about her and she's not acting. So what that did for me was it just removed any sort of stability that really wasn't there in the first place, but any sort of stability
Yeah.
was now gone. And then all of the questions came. So questions that maybe you wouldn't really face or intercept until later in life, like who am I? Why am I here? How am I going to make a difference? They started getting loud and they started really haunting me early. So I think what I knew was the ways not to go. I had a lot of really great examples of how you escape life, all the isms like alcoholism, workaholism, all the isms were there. Lots of dysfunction was there. Lots of patterns that were not healthy were there. So I knew all of what not to do, but that was really scary because I didn't know what to do. But I knew there had to be a better way. But inevitably, when you're not patterned to thrive, and when you're definitely not patterned for who God formed, shaped, and anointed you to be, you learn patterns to survive. And this is self sabotage, right? So, self sabotage is any way that you are limiting yourself or hindering your destiny.
Mm,
Okay. So, and this, I like to say that we all have our own cocktail of this, and it's socially acceptable a lot of the times, right? Like
right.
high achievement, perfectionism, codependency, people pleasing, right? Procrastination, making excuses for things, talking yourself out of things, right? Playing it safe. There's so many things that we do, but inevitably we're trained to be cowards. We're not trained to show up. We're not trained to be powerful people. We're not trained to use our voice. We're not trained to be strong and very courageous. We're not at all. And so instead, we learn how to shrink. We learn how to be quiet. We learn how to avoid things. We learn how to tolerate a lot of things that are not okay. And what you tolerate dominates always. So it's
Mm,
when you think about the enemy too, like the oppression that he'll tell you, the lies that he'll tell you, if you just allow that to be floating through your mind all day, that will dominate you and it'll tell you who you are and what's possible for you. So then we just live in a house of limitation and we think that's normal because for most people that has been normal. And until that's
right.
challenged, we don't know the oppression that we're under. Right? And so when we start
Yeah.
waking up, like a lot of times people will call that, the world calls that the dark night of the soul. Right? When you
Yeah.
start waking up, there's like layers and layers and layers of dysfunction that you find and layers of healing or trauma or different things that you've gone through that have allowed you to survive. But none of that was to really help you be who you're actually here to be. And that can be really, really hard to sit in and start figuring out. So a lot of what we do on the podcast is from self sabotage to self mastery, there's a faith gap. Okay.
Mm,
I like to talk about self mastery with God because that's all about growing up in God. That's spiritual maturity. That's evolving into who He already formed, shaped, and anointed you to be. So, a lot of times that's learning to let go of things that never served you in the first place and being more of who He says you are and being more and more of what He says you can do, right? Starting to step into that and live into that every day. But that is very terrifying on the inside. Like your body feels like it's legitimately threatened. It's like, we're
oh,
gonna
yeah.
like, where? And you know what I mean? Like it freaks out on the inside. And that's the faith gap, right? It's almost like when you go to the mall and it's like you are here and you see your plot point, and then you're trying to find your favorite store. Picture that as like the promise,
Yes.
right? Then you've got this faith gap. But however we fill that gap is on us. Like we can resist our way, excuse our way, complain our way, get caught like circle the mountain again, right? Or we can start really tracking with God. And that's the God's vibes piece, right? How do you align and track with God in all you think, say, and do? And you learn,
Mm,
start imitating Him and patterning yourself after Him, and you become a different person, but you really become who He made you to be. And you unlearn in that process all the bad habits.
yes.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so right off the bat, I am loving this, and I feel like as women, there's just so much of the well, like you said, it's normal. Like, it's so easy to just skim over it because it's so acceptable
Yeah.
to get caught up in those things that cover up the discomfort of letting God into those vulnerable places, you know? That is hard. It's really hard when you start unwinding that and undoing those mindsets, like, oh,
Because you do. You have to sit, the whole be still and know takes on a whole new meaning. You have to actually sit in a lot of discomfort, right? In order to really identify a lie, that's one thing, but then actually release it and replace it with truth. Like that's work, right? And this is work that's behind the scenes, thank God. Right? Like
yeah.
we're placed for that a lot of times. Unfortunately, if you're in Hollywood, that doesn't always happen, right? But
Mhm.
it's behind the scenes, and that's what makes it so hard too, because it's not celebrated, it's not often acknowledged, and it doesn't feel like you're getting anywhere for a while. When really it's
Yes.
pretty accelerated in hindsight, but it doesn't feel like you're getting anywhere because you're so used to being distracted. You're so used to being busy because even busy can be self sabotage, right? You're so used to having a vice, right? So just think about that. Like your area of sabotage could be where you're limping, where you have a crutch. So just picture your life without that crutch, right?
Yes,
That already starts to
totally.
freak people out.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're like, "If I didn't do that thing, like, what would I do? I'd have so much more time. I'd probably
Oh my
make so much more
goodness.
money, but what would I do?"
Exactly. It's almost, like, so uncomfortable. Like, it makes me think of how my hands just always have to be busy. Like, if I am doing something like, sometimes it's hard for me even just to stand still with my hands at my side, and I see that so much in the way that we operate in American culture. It's like we always have to be busy, we always have to be doing something, we feel like we need to be productive. It's so hard to be still, but that surrender of just, like, opening our hands, opening our lives to the Lord, as hard as it is and as raw and vulnerable and scary as it can be,
Yeah.
it's so countercultural because that's where we find our freedom, you know? But
Yes.
so many women are getting caught in this trap and feeling like maybe not even noticing that they're in a trap or in a cycle that's not serving them at all. So, when you are talking to women about self-sabotage,
Yeah.
what what do you wish more women knew? Like, how we get into the cycle and then how we get out of it and get free from it?
Well, I think just one, like, I don't know who told us that healing or personal development or spiritual growth had to be miserable. Right? Like, I think, like, that's the
Yeah.
main thing that stops us in the first place. We're like, "Oh my god, what do I have to let go of?" Or like, "How awful is my life gonna get?" Or, "This is gonna be miserable. I'd rather just not know." You know what I mean? I'd rather kinda, like, play dumb or, like, you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
In that lane, like, once you know, now you're responsible for it, so I think we try to avoid doing the work for that reason, but if you knew that you would step into more wholeness, joy, freedom, creativity, expression, life, right? Alignments, favor, blessing than you ever dreamed possible for you, that would suddenly become inviting.
Mm,
Hey, like, if you knew that love is not oppression, right? We've been taught conditional love. We've been taught what love is supposed to look like, and that ain't it for a lot of us,
right.
right? Like, it's not performance, it's not pleasing people, it's not making sure people are good and denying yourself, right? Like, we've learned so many things, but if you learn that love is actually not oppressive, it's freedom, then you're going to start looking at yourself a little bit differently. And I think the first thing you find is you haven't really been loving yourself, right? And you already know how hard it is to not love yourself and to not advocate for yourself. So what if you just flip the script? Right? Like, what if
Right.
you actually started learning to not bully yourself? I was an athlete, right? A collegiate athlete too. So like there's some coaches that show up where they just want to like push you and like almost like tear you down to motivate you. That is a
Mm,
horrible motivator. Horrible.
yeah.
Right? And you learn to be the biggest critic of yourself, right? So imagine if you just flipped the narrative there and started speaking life and pouring courage into yourself every day. You can go way farther with a little bit of encouragement than you can with all of the bullying in the word. All of the hate, all of the things that you'll tell yourself every single day, it just weighs you down. So what if it could be fun? What if it could be life-giving? What if you became your advocate? I think just entertaining some of that in the beginning will change your entire experience. And then I think secondly, God says that there's hidden treasure in earthen vessels. I love that, right? Like,
Yeah.
there's so much potential and treasure on the inside of us that you don't even know that you have access to. Like, wouldn't that be worth discovering and finding out for you? I don't know, right? Like, I used to be
Yeah.
somebody who didn't think I was creative, which is hysterical today, right? Like, I've written 5 books, like, you know what I mean? Like, I'm doing so many things that are actually, like, very creative, but I, for the longest time, didn't think I was. But even just the shift, like, you are made in the image and likeness of your creator, therefore you're creative. You're creating every
Yeah.
day. Your life is your creation. Like, do you like it or not? You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I think if you make some of this practical, it actually becomes simple. So simple that a child could get it. And that childlikeness is usually the way. And what's fun about that is if you can embrace this childlikeness, it's almost like you get your childhood back. So many people have had to
Mhm.
grow up so quickly. They've had to be the adults, they've had to parent the parent, they've had to face a lot of things in the world that we live in now so fast, and we have to process so much information that we've had to really grow up, and we've been robbed of a childhood. But imagine with the kingdom, unless you become like a child, you can't even enter it. So if you can just
Yeah.
become more childlike and more playful and have some joy in your life, right? Like, I think thinking about the kingdom of God is righteousness, peace, and joy in the Holy Spirit. So think about that. Joy is a third of the kingdom that matters to God, right? Like, you having joy, you having peace, you knowing that you don't have to perform for approval is the foundation of how you get to live
Yes.
life. So everything that you get to discover, what if it's treasure? What if it's not bad? So I think just that fundamental shift is key. And then when you think about mastery, every next level requires a different version of you. So there's no shortcuts in that way, right? Your life is always moving at the speed of your obedience. So, like, why not start obeying? Why not start milking your seasons for all they're worth and learning your lessons? And let that keep stacking so that you're ready for things. It feels good to be ready. It feels good to be prepared. It feels good to
Yes.
master things. And that can become not really an addiction, but a new passion. I want to be excellent. I want to master things in my life. I don't want to be somebody that is a coward who shies away from things, who drops the ball on things, who never keeps promises with herself. Like, I don't want to train that. So you get to train something new. And that's really what it
Mhm.
is. I call it Holy Spirit boot camp. Right? Like, we're
I
on
love it.
a journey with God where we get to go on our own personal boot camp, right? But it gets to be fun and life giving. It all flows through relationship. And so it's really God redeeming your relationship with Him, yourself, and then other people. And through that, you become very influential because you start looking like Him,
Mm.
right? So instead of sabotage, just think about replacements. You used the word countercultural earlier, and that's really what it's like. In the beginning, it's basically, I used to think about intuition. I didn't come from a legacy of faith. So for some people, if they can just grasp that, what if you started listening to your intuition at every opportunity instead of ignoring it? That is actually how you start forming self respect,
Wow.
self trust, right? If you just started listening to that instead of ignoring it, because you ignoring you gives permission to other people to do the same thing. And then we like to
Mm.
blame other people for that when really we're setting the bar. Right? So what
Yeah.
listen to yourself and started assuring yourself and stepping out when you hear that voice. That alone will change your life. For the countercultural piece, usually it's doing the exact opposite of what you've always done. So where you used to shut up, you got to start speaking up. Or you used to like run from things, you got to start leaning in. Where you used to avoid, now you need to go do. Right. And that's how you start breaking those patterns. You break it by practicing and reinforcing another one.
Mm.
Clear on what you want to get good at. So that example where I was saying you are here and then God is showing you over here, it's almost like he gives you a prophetic picture, if you will, like a puzzle. If you buy a puzzle and you see the picture, it's almost like he gives you this glimpse of where you're going. Okay. Like Habakkuk is quoted all the time, right? The vision make it plain. Like he'll give you pictures a lot of times. And then you're
Yeah.
like, I have no clue how that's going to happen. But you start closing that faith gap. Okay. Who do I need to be more of to actually steward that well? What do I need
Yeah.
to start practicing so that I actually feel ready? Like, not feeling ready is okay. That tells you what your preparation is, right? So, for example, if
Mm.
somebody sees themselves speaking on stage, do you talk at all right now? Have you joined
Yeah.
Toastmasters before? Like, have you written a speech? Like, maybe start doing some of that, right? Like, your strategies will become clear when you're actually ready and willing to do it. And then you
Mm.
start closing that gap and you get closer and closer. So, when it happens, you're ready. You're ready. And that feels really good, like I said. So you start mastering in the process. So instead of the sabotage, you're like, okay, that's almost like your old nature, your unrenewed self. That's dead.
Yeah.
To think of it as like spiritually dead. You can activate that if you want to, but you got options. So instead of activating that today, what would feel better? What would actually bring life? What would bring joy? What would actually change the situation and help you progress and close that faith?
Mm.
Because there's things that we do that help us do that, and there's things that keep us circling the mountain, right? If you've already seen
Totally.
that movie before, maybe stop watching it and like actually taking a step, right? Like again,
Yes.
simple, but I think we have a tendency to over spiritualize things or make it really complicated. But when you can just break it down and be accountable to that and becoming this highest, most free expression of yourself, what might that be worth to you and those that you're connected to? Everything. Everything. And it's gonna cost you something. It's gonna cost some
Mhm.
learning, it's gonna cost a lot of sacrifices, it's gonna cost time, right? But it's worth it. It's worth it.
Yes.
So hopefully that answered that. But I think there's many ways that you can come at it. I think the foundation is key though, because if we think it has to be hard, a lot of times we won't even step into it.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense because I think that's the biggest thing with so much of this faith and spiritual life is we overcomplicate it. Like we do. We think of all of these ways where it's like, no, it can't be that simple. No, it couldn't possibly be just saying yes to God and then obeying, right? But it's so true that we overcomplicate the process, and that faith gap, I feel, is where so many of us, or at least I have, get stuck there
Yeah.
because it just feels like this elusive thing where it's just floating in between where I'm at and where I wanna be, or those glimpses that I feel God has given me of the future, but it's like, hopefully I end up there one day, but then we don't move, we never move, and so even that accountability piece that you touched on, I would love to hear more about that because it really is a huge part of it, being accountable to yourself, to the
Yeah.
Lord, other people, like, that I feel like is one of the most powerful things we can do to actually move forward when we are in the in between.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think the beautiful thing about accountability is just thinking about that. And again, breaking it down and keeping it simple right now. Like, what are who you're accountable to now? Just get honest about it. Like, are you accountable to anybody? Like, does anybody actually know what's going on in your life? Does anybody get placed to speak into your life? Right? Like, do you have space for sound counsel in your life? Does anybody get to correct you? Maybe you're not
Mm,
always right. You know what I mean?
yeah.
Like, that kind of feedback in your life, like, just really, really think about it because we live in a culture of lone rangers, right? Like, I'm independent, self-sufficient, I got mine, like, I'm good, like, live your best
Right.
life. Like, we live in this narrative of, like, we're superhuman, but we're supposed to be supernatural, which means you're actually dependent by nature. Okay.
Mm,
So the way that we've been trained is actually what creates anxiety. It's actually what creates unnecessary stress on your body and unnecessary suffering. It's what brings disease. Dis-ease is
mm,
literally disease, right? So we're training ourselves out of what's most true and what's most natural for us. So we're meant to depend on God. There's the scripture, it's in Philippians, I think it's like 2:13, somewhere around there. But it talks about how God will actually give you the will, like the desire and the power to do what pleases him. I nerd
yes.
out on that because I'm like, if you've seen yourself try to get motivated before, like you've seen how that goes. Like it does
Right.
doesn't work. It's like, let me muster some energy. And you're like, yeah, that's great. That's not gonna work, right? Like you've seen yourself do that. So just knowing that I get to partner with God and I get to depend on God and me plus God changes everything. Like I'm actually supposed to be
Yes.
supernatural. Like put some super on my natural. Let's do that all the time. Right? Then you're not doing
Yes.
anything in your own wisdom, in your own understanding, in your own strength. Like you've got so much more backing you up than you realize. And then you can flow in wisdom that's beyond you. You can flow in strategy that you could have never, even on your best day, come up with on your own. And you're getting these divine ideas or this inspiration, which literally means being in spirit. You're getting a prompting, you're getting an idea. And sure, you could take credit for it, but you know that didn't come from you, right? Like
Yep.
but you're given so much help when you just humble yourself, when you submit to God, when you surrender these words that we don't like. That means that I am getting out of the way because I know that there is a greater way and I choose to let God have the right way in my life. Like I'm going to yield.
Yes.
I'm going to yield, right? I'm going to yield to there could be a better thought than I'm thinking right now. I'm going to yield that there could be a better way, like this or something better. Right. I love reminding myself or just soothing myself for that. Right. Like I'm going to yield that like I could be in the wrong here. So God, like I'm open to your correction because you correct or chastise those that you love. So when you think about accountability, thinking about that with God might not be your first jump if you don't have a strong father relationship or if you
Mhm.
haven't had a good relationship with authority. That might be a hard jump to just be like, become accountable to God. I
Yeah.
think what's easier is getting practical accountability in your life, even if you have to pay for it. So if that is taking responsibility for your healing journey, because you know your heart is sick or your soul is weak, right? Like your mind is everywhere all the time, your emotions are everywhere all the time, you got a lot of anxiety, your heart is heavy. That is all of that together indicators that there's some past stuff coming up,
Mhm.
right? There's patterns there. So if you actually get some accountability in your life, meet with a therapist. Start unpacking, get a language, get a grid, get an understanding of what it is that you've been carrying every day. So that you can start seeing, okay, maybe I can release that. If you're ready to start taking action, get a coach. Have somebody that you're meeting with and that you're actually learning what it means to be accountable to somebody and have somebody confront you. Have somebody like hold you to what you're setting out to do. Like start learning and have somebody model that for you. If you've never done
Yes.
life, like have that model for you and pay for it if you have to. Like, I'm a huge advocate of that. And then start actively developing relationship. And this is really hard if you haven't come from a strong home or community, but start actively seeking out healthy community. Sometimes that's through volunteering, sometimes that's through a local church, sometimes that's through a hobby, but get people in your life that you can practice being vulnerable with, you can practice being seen with, you can practice developing depth of relationship with. Like we get really good at being super shallow. Like, "Hey, how
Mhm.
are you? I'm good." Right? You do that, like, with everybody, but nobody, like, knows intimately what's happening, what keeps you up at night, what you wrestle
Right.
with, and you could have people praying for you, covering for you, giving you wisdom, giving you guidance, helping you make tough decisions and walk with you through that, and that changes everything, right? And then you can keep adding that
Absolutely.
to your life, but I like to think of having an entire advisory board. That's kinda how I look at it now. I'm like, spiritual mentors, therapists, coaches, those friends that you know, like your wise friends are like, "Hey, supporting you 100, but consider this."
Yes.
Right? You know what I mean? Or people that you can call and be like, "Hey, I have to make a really big decision. Can you help me pray through this thing?" Right? Like that stuff changes everything in these pivotal moments in
Yes.
your life. And so just learning that accountability and being seen, being valued, being appreciated, being championed in your life is what we all crave and what we all need. And if you just gave yourself a little bit more what you needed, imagine how much more you could access in your life. Right? So
Yes.
thinking like authority is bad or like accountability is bad, like flip it again. Because we get these ideas and then we just let that limit us. So challenge
Mm.
the idea of whatever you think accountability means or authority means. So for example, authority with God means the power, it's like anointing. So the power of God that he expresses through a human vessel. So we start growing in more power the more we depend on him and the more we grow up
Mm.
with him. Okay. And the more you're accountable to doing that and getting better and better at it, like a coach keeps you accountable to your highest good. Why would you not
Yes.
want that in your life? Ask me that,
Right.
right? Like, why would you not? You know what I mean? Like, literally, though, like it's not a luxury, it's literally a necessity. That's how I view it. We don't know our blind spots. We don't know what's gonna happen in a weak moment, we probably have an idea. Like, temptation can get anybody. Like, the minute you think you're good, a fall's coming if you're not careful, right? Pride always comes before a fall. So we need those people
Yep.
to be like, "Hey, your motive feels a bit off here. Hey, like, you actually might need to go fix that because the way you delivered that might have hurt this person's heart." That kind of stuff is everything when you're going through life, but we need that to literally think
Yes.
we're right and our way is always working is deception. And deception is usually the thing that takes most leaders out.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. So much in there. So true. And I feel like so many people, well, I mean, I've just talked to a lot of women who don't have that in their life. They're like, I don't know how to find community. I don't know how to find a mentor, a coach, those kinds of things. And it reminds me of that quote that's like, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. It's just so true. Like, sure, you can do a lot of good on your own, but when you're depending on your own strength, your own wisdom, I mean, we're limited. We're limited people. We cannot do it all on our own. It's so important to have those voices in our life, those people who have other eyes, checking our blind spots, who can help us grow, who have been there before us.
Yes.
And it's just, there's nothing like that. It's so valuable. So, if somebody were to come to you and say, I don't know where to find that,
Yeah.
what would you recommend for somebody who's like, this is all new to me?
Yeah. I think embrace that. Embrace that, right?
Mm.
Like God, like if you can just ask for help, like, hey, God, like I'm really desiring, like I love praying for spiritual mothers and spiritual fathers, like having beautiful covering in your life, especially if you haven't experienced that in the natural. Like pray for that. Or pray for this community. Pray to be led. Pray that you'll walk straight into it, or you'll be guided into it, or that they will reach out to you. Like something that God could only facilitate. But pray
Yeah.
for God to bring that into your life or draw you straight to it because it's going to show up as an answered prayer and it will blow your mind. Like I smile because there's so many people. We have a mastermind, right? Called the God's Eye Mastermind. There's so many people that got in there. They're like, I got an email. I listened to a podcast episode. It's so funny, but they all were drawn. God got them all there with a similar prayer request or desire, and it showed up as
Mm.
answered prayer to them. So I joke that I pray them in and I'll know that they're the people because it'll feel like an answer to prayer.
Wow.
And so it's really beautiful, like how it happens, right? Like they're being prayed in and they're praying, right? And then God orchestrates the whole thing. So just think about it that way. Like you don't have to live without it. And God wants you to have that more than you do. And he will guide you straight to it when you're open. And sometimes he wants to use you. Like I was guided to community to serve in the beginning where
Mm,
I was asking for God. I'm like, wanting communities, like, I'm going to help you actually build one, right? Like, he'll teach you things. So just be open to how he does it. Cause I think it's really easy sometimes to accept that that's a desire that we want, but it's harder to accept how God does it, right? Like his will and his way. I think we get
right?
like it's supposed to look like this by this time or else, right? And that's,
Yeah.
worldly black and white human, right? But I think if you're just open to how he does it, know that he knows exactly what you need and he knows exactly how to get you all of that, all of it. Like even secret petitions that you forgot to ask for, God knows how to bring it all to you. And it will be so gratifying and fulfilling in a way that you didn't even know how to voice or how to ask for. So just know that God has already prepared that for you, right? The Jeremiah 29:11. He has good plans for you, planned in advance that you might walk in them. Part of that plan, if you have a desire for community, God already has it, right? Or
Yes.
sometimes he will use you to create it. And that's also something to pay attention to as well. I started to notice that he kept having me take weird risks. You know what I mean? Like I was the person that would like go out and meet the humans. And I'm like, this is funny. Cause I used to be programmed as like the shy introvert and that would be my worst nightmare. Like this feels like a cruel joke. Like, why do you keep sending me out to like go meet the humans? Right?
Yeah.
Go to this networking thing. Go try this weird hobby, like random things. I'm even thinking when I first moved to Austin, I learned how to DJ. I did like some crazy, I created yoga studio so I could get free yoga. Like there was so many random things that I was doing, but I was like, this is so funny. To, like again, like an introverted kind of like keep to yourself person. But there was a
Yes.
theme that kept happening where he kept having me go out and facilitate connection and community and safe spaces. And I was like, wait a minute. I keep looking for that, but you actually want me to build it. So in hindsight, it's so interesting because now we have Courage Co, right? But I didn't catch that for a while. And at first I was like, man, like I keep trying to like find community and God's like, hello, like I keep showing you that I need you to build it.
Yeah.
So that could be part of it too. So just pay attention to how the subtleties and how things are evolving, 'cause there's a theme that God is always unfolding with you, and that can be fun to explore too.
Absolutely. Well, it's so cool because it kind of circles back to the whole self-sabotage thing. As you were sharing about that, it just brought me back to my childhood, and even when I was in high school, I used to be so afraid. I was the most introverted person, just dealt with so much fear of man,
Yeah,
fear of rejection, all of those things. And now that I've processed a lot of that with the Lord, I see how those things he had to grow in me because they're actually part of the purpose and the plan that he had for my life to draw people together and to share my story, use my voice. And all along, the enemy was trying to silence me, talk me out of it, give me every excuse. And so I developed those patterns of self sabotage. And it wasn't until I started inviting other people into my story that I had people consistently speaking his truth over me,
yeah,
reminding me who I am, who he's called me to be. And that's such a huge part of the moments when I look back and I'm like, that was a turning point for me, is when I realized that is not the truth about me. And I needed people around me to help me see that so I could get out of this self sabotage cycle and into God's will for my life, which again, like you've said, is so freeing. There's so much joy in it. Like it's so light,
yeah,
which is what he wants for us, you know?
yes. There's a scripture that you'll probably love too. It's in Proverbs, I believe, but it talks about wisdom. But I just really believe that this is how God leads us too. But it says it's talking about wisdom like a woman, right? But it says wisdom leads in ways of pleasantness and peace. So I love that when you think about sabotage, right? Like just discerning it in your body. Sabotage is sort of like the enemy. He's like the accuser of the brethren, like nothing you do is ever right. It's just like oppressive, right? So it always feels limiting. It feels suffocating. It feels heavy. It feels restrictive somehow. It feels overwhelming, right? That's what sabotage feels like. There's like a heaviness to that, right? But God, it's like inviting. It's pleasant. There's like you're being drawn into something. It's almost like magnetic.
Yes.
Like there's an inspiration. There's an ease about it. There's an excitement about it if you'll let yourself feel it. Do you know what I mean? Like there's a joyful anticipation of something good happening. Like you have hope when you haven't had hope for a while. You could actually
Yes.
see something and you've been like shut off from seeing in that area for a long time. Like it is a beautiful invitation almost. And there's a very lightness of being as he describes about it. And so that makes it enticing to you, right? Like you don't have to carry all that weight. It doesn't have to be so heavy. It can actually be fun. It can actually be enjoyable. It can actually be an expression of you that is natural. And that's what God has already designed for you. And so when you start leaning into him more, right, you're almost just aligning with all the good plans. You walk straight into it. Like he's not
Yes.
pushing you into a dark place or into like, some dark alley. The enemy wants to do that, right? But God is always drawing you back to the path and like just inviting you into it. He's like, oh, like, let's just turn you this way. You know what I mean? Like picture a kid that's like running left. You know what I mean? You're like, no, let them run this. It's kind of what he's doing, right? So it's if you get that, then I think it becomes easier to say yes quicker, easier to move without all the questions and all the resistance, easier just to be like, I don't have to get it all, but I know that it's good. And also,
Mhm.
I just need this step.
Right.
I think
Absolutely.
so many, but you just need the one.
Yes. And I love that that comes back to your point about the faith gap,
Yep.
because I think that's the beauty of it. Like you've mentioned already, is it's about partnership with God.
Yeah.
It's relationship. That's the that's the sweetest, most beautiful piece of all of it, is just he loves us and he wants to do it with us.
Yeah.
And I think we get so caught up sometimes when we feel like, oh, I've got to figure all this out on my own, or why do I keep messing this up? I keep feeling like I'm failing or whatever. And I want to be all God wants me to be. And it's, we forget to even invite him into the process. It's like he has not given us a plan or a passion or a purpose and then said, figure it out.
Yeah.
He has invited us into partnership with him for the dreams and plans he has for us. And that's how we close that faith gap. And
Yeah.
you're so right. It's just, can we take one more step? Can we say the
Yeah.
yes next? The next yes. Can we show up
Yeah.
just one more day at a time? And it does. It brings so much peace and clarity when we connect back to his will and his plan and his design for us. It's
Yeah.
so freeing. And I hate that so many women miss that, getting caught up in all of the the overcomplication of it.
Well, I think unfortunately, like the way we're wired as humans, like it usually takes a massive amount of pain to finally be broken enough to lean into God. I know that's true in my
Yeah.
story. It's true of a lot of people that I work with one on one, that we've thought we've had to play God, right? Like we've thought that we've had to be the people with all the answers. We thought we've had to have it all and do it all. We thought that it had to look some sort of way. And I don't think we ever challenged any of that. Right. So then when we're tired and when that doesn't work or a relationship falls apart or what we had in mind fell apart or things like do not unfold and we get an expectation hangover, right? Then we're like, now what? Like, I'm actually
Right.
kind of tired of playing God. I'm kind of over the fact that I have to keep figuring it out. Like, all of this just doesn't feel good anymore. There has to be a better way. And that
Mhm.
point is usually when we're open to actually start developing a relationship with God and start discovering that there could be another way and it could be life giving, right? It could, yes, there's going to be sacrifice of things that are familiar and things that are comfortable, but they were ultimately things that were going to probably destroy me anyway. And if I become an expert at destroying and sabotaging myself, like what would it be like to just practice something different? And if I got really good at that, how would my life change? And if God
Mm.
were going to help me with that, that actually is way better than what I could come up with on my own.
Oh, every time.
Right. So I think that shift, if you can just sit and actually have those questions, but we're not doing that. Like we're not getting still to be like, I'm not happy. I don't have it together. I'm tired of like living with a God complex. Like I really
Right.
don't know if I can have a relationship with God and that freaks me out. But what am I going to do about it? Right? Like,
Mhm.
how am I going to find out? Probably buy a Bible, maybe start reading it. You know what I mean? We got
Yes.
so basic, well, that's basic, but we got to start somewhere, right? And then imagine, like, I joke that I gave God a year. I'm like, listen, I'll do whatever you tell me to do for like a year, right? Because I needed the timeline, right? But then it's like when you see what God can just do in a year of your life, you're like, oh, okay, right? And when you get that, you're
Yes.
like, think about it. If you're just, if you even just give God a year, if you ever given God a year fully, wholly, completely before, and if you just do that, just experiment for yourself, like make it your intention to grow in your sensitivity to God. Turn down the noise of other things and get close to him. Read the word, start breaking it down, start learning how to study that and digest that and apply it so you can live it. It's not how much you know, it's how
Yes.
much you live, right? So, like, actually make that a priority in your life, maybe for the first time ever. Stop saying that you don't know and do something about it, right? Put yourself
Mm,
in spaces where there's people that live this lifestyle of faith that's attractive to you. You're like, "You've got this relationship with God that actually gets me amped. Like, how do I get that? Like, why are you such a happy human?" Like, I was so she said she found my podcast from Australia because there's, like, a joyful photo of me, and she was irritated that I had so much joy. But then figured out that, like, God wanted her to have that, and then started listening and got
Uh,
it. It was so
oh my
funny.
gosh.
It's
That's
just like
amazing.
but that kinda stuff can happen, right? So, I think if you could just be seriously honest with yourself, like humble yourself before yourself and be very clear about where you're at. Like, stop lying to yourself. The denial and the lies, I think, is the thing that just keeps you in these patterns of being unhappy and going through many cycles of unnecessary suffering. And it's when is enough going to be enough? And today could be that day. Today's the day that enough is enough. And here's what I'm willing to do about it. And if you don't have the strength and the structure, give yourself that. Again, pay for it. Get a coach. Have that structure, that time that you meet every day on your calendar. Start putting things in place that support you. And then soon enough, and very quickly, actually, you'll start having a whole new cycle of life, a whole new life experience, right? With things that are helping you build, like new habits, new practices, new rituals, all of that. Right?
Yes.
When you're aligned with something different, you also receive different. Different people will come into your life. You'll have different desires. Different things will be attractive to you. What used to destroy you doesn't even make it in your life anymore, right? That's possible, but you do have to have that pivotal moment where you're like, I'm not okay. I need help. Things need to change. And then you
Right.
sit here and be like, and who is going to be doing something about that? And when would now be a good time? Right? Like, you kind of got to like get to
Yes.
that moment and sit there and just have like, instead of almost like a come to Jesus moment, like a come to self moment. Like,
Mm,
self, I see you. Like, I see what we're doing here. We're not going to do that anymore.
yes, that's so good. And honestly, this episode is gonna air at the beginning of the new year. So, what a good time right here at the beginning of the new year to start. So, like, if you were talking to somebody who's like, "I hear what you're saying, Juliana. I am ready. Like, I wanna dedicate this year to the Lord, give him space to take me on whatever journey he wants for my life. I'm done with the cycles of self-sabotage. I want to be accountable to my life." What would you say to her?
Yeah. I would say put money where your mouth is, right? Or put your action where your talk is. So for me, that's been very practical. I'm like, who is the next spiritual advisor, coach? What is the next program? What is the structure? And I know that I've got to go on a journey, that there's a process. Like, there's no like aborting the mission and there's no like shortcuts to this thing, right? So if I'm gonna go all in, I usually want something that's like a year long, 6 months long, something that's solid. So I would actually look for a relationship with somebody that's going to keep me accountable, because just knowing that I can't hold it all would be a great awareness to have. Then a structure that I can just put into my life. Like, I know for this period of time, I'm going to be working on these things. And I know
Mm,
if I say I'm going to do it, but don't put that structure there, I'm not going to show up. Right. I'm going to excuse my way. I'm going to find some other thing that's somehow more important, even though it's not.
oh, yeah.
I would literally put money, like invest in your growth or invest in that development, invest in what you are available for. If you're not available for this anymore, like, what are you available for? And make that a part of your life actively. Some people that's a gym membership, some people that's a coach, that's a program, something. But actually make that a very real practical thing that lands in your calendar and you show up doing every single week. Right. And then I think
Yep.
also adding people in your life that know that you're doing that. Hey, I'm
Yes.
committed to this thing, so they can check in with you and be like, "Hey, how's that thing going?" Right? And when you, like, wanna squirm and not let them know about it, like, they're still with you and making sure that you got accountability. So I would just make
Yes.
it a year of a hard yes to everything that God is telling you to do and a hard no to everything that He's not. And just let your yes
Mm,
be your yes and your no be your no, and get really good at doing that. It's not like
that's so good.
maybe or it could no. Like, if it's maybe, it's a no, right? Or it's like, "Let me pray up," then no. Right? Like, oh, no doubt. If it's a no, it's a no. Like, just Own that for everybody
Yes.
included. And then if it's a yes, like you'll be excited about it. You'll have every reason, everything backing you into that yes. Right. So just be clear. None of this like maybe in between wishy washy self stuff. No. Yes or no. Life can be that.
Hmm.
That's what I would do. Give your yes to everything that God's on and a no to everything he's not.
I love that. That's so, so, so good. Oh my goodness. Thank you. This has been such a powerful conversation. Again, I think also so timely. But before we go, will you please just tell everybody where they can connect with you, get more of this, work with you, everything?
Totally. So all the things live at julianapage.com. That's kind of like the main hub that you can go everywhere out of from the podcast, all the things. And then it's www.couragecode.org for the community. So it's free. We make all this very accessible depending on where you are in the journey. Like if you're like brand new and you're like, I hope God's real, get it. Right. Or want to do like a deep dive and like have a journey with people that want to do that as well. We make sure that it's not like social media, so you're not getting inundated. So it's www.couragego.org.
I love it. That's amazing. Well, you guys definitely need to connect. And I am just so thankful for you for being here today, for sharing your story, and for everything you're helping women do so that they can show up to their life and to their purpose with the Lord. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to tune into another episode of the By Words Show. I love having you here, and I am truly so thankful for your support. Don't forget to share a screenshot of this episode to let me know you were here. And quick favor, if you enjoyed this episode, would you take a second to leave a review? It really helps our community grow. If you want more, you can shop my books Waking Up and Love Is at thehannahhughes.com or on Amazon. And be sure to join my email list for all the latest news. I can't wait to chat again soon, but in the meantime, be sure to come connect with me on social media, and remember, I'm cheering you on.